have you here and share our experiences at COP27. For me, I was a newbie, so it was really interesting kind of seeing this through fresh eyes, but we have a few veterans here, Emilie and Fran as well. And I think it'd be nice to do like a quick intro before I head in and start my experience. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm Michelle. I'm the founder of Women in Climate. I live in New York. I used to work in tech. Now I work on climate full time. I have two projects, one called Clever Carbon and one called Women in Climate. It's really nice to meet everyone here. I'll popcorn it to Emilie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emilie McGlone. Thank you so much to Women in Climate for having us here today. I work as the director of the international organization Peace Boat US, which promotes the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals through educational programs on board our ship, which travels around the world. So very excited to share about our COP experiences this year in Egypt. And this was my third COP. I joined at COP25 and 26 as well. So trying to kind of compare and see how we can improve each year and also share insights with all of you so we can make COP28 even better. Thanks. I'll pass it to Fran.
Thanks, and echoing thanks to Michelle for inviting me. Random happening in the gym, she saw my water bottle that said climate on it. So I'm Fran Fuller. I am originally from Antigua and Barbuda in the Caribbean. I've been working on climate, I guess, since I came out of my undergrad. Went to my first COP in 2007 in Bali. And the following year, actually, was part of the team that chaired the group of 77 in China in the climate field. And so I've been working in the UNFCCC space since then, on and off. I now am the director of the office here in New York of a nonprofit called Climate Analytics. We do climate science research and policy advice. If you've ever heard of the Climate Action Tracker, that's us. I don't personally work on that, but my team members do. And we mainly focus at the moment on implementation in small island developing states and in least developed countries, supporting them in accessing finance to implement their climate action. And of course, being based here in New York, we work a lot with UN missions and with UN agencies on the issue of climate. Just to note, in the past 2 years, because I'm from Antigua and Barbuda was chairing the Alliance of Small Island States. That is a negotiation group in the UNFCCC space and at the COP. And I've been an advisor to the chair for the past 2 years and focusing on mitigation and science issues mainly.
Michelle, I think sorry, just had you on mute.
So fun to have you, Fran, and what a chance encounter to see you at the gym and see climate on the bottle. So that does help everyone. Wherever you go, wear your pin, put climate somewhere, and people will find you. So I'm going to go ahead and start my portion here. So I'm going to remove Fran and Emilie for the moment. But, for me, attending COP27 was not something that I had necessarily planned for during the year, but there were a few opportunities that presented themselves to me. And after, really thinking about what does it mean for me to go on this trip financially, environmental impact, and, will I be productive on the trip? And, I took some time to really reflect on that. And I felt that, yes, I would be. And so, I think within a matter of a month, I made a decision that I would be going to COP. And it was a very adventurous experience. So I kind of want to tell the story from start to end. So I had booked a flight to fly into Cairo, and there's no direct flights to Sharm. So the event itself was not in Cairo. It was in a sort of resort area in Egypt called Sharm el-Sheikh. It's by the Red Sea. It's absolutely beautiful. It's mostly desert, but you can't fly there directly. So I was at the airport, and Emilie happened to be on the same flight as me. And long story short, our flight was canceled. And we ended up staying at the Marriott on Long Island for 2 nights, not even just like one night, but 2 nights. And they had our bags. We had already checked in. So it's not like we could really leave, because if we did, that means there was no guarantees we would get our bags. So this trip is already off to a very adventurous start. But As you know, what humans often do, we make lemonade out of lemons. So Emily and I got together. There's a lot of people headed to COP on our flight that was canceled. So we all did a happy hour together. We ate our lunches together, and we managed to network and learn even before COP had begun. So that was a really fun experience. And then once we arrived to Sharm, then so COP is essentially 2 weeks, and you need a special badge to get into the main conference. And for the first week, I did not have a main badge, and that's what they call the Blue Zone badge. So you're having conversations in Egypt and it's like, oh, where are you going to be today? Oh, I'll be at the Blue Zone, or I'll be at a side event. So the first week I was really involved in side events. And one of the events that I attended was the Terra Carta Forum, and through their Sustainable Markets Initiative. And if you haven't heard of this initiative before, it's actually spearheaded by King Charles. And he brings together a lot of different companies to innovate on how they can be more sustainable. And this was held at the Four Seasons Hotel. It was a really, really nice venue. And there were a lot of conversations around the different organizations that are part of the Sustainable Markets Initiative. And there were other side events that were happening as well. So The Economist had a little sort of short event. You can see it's more of a round table. They served lunch and they had some programming there. I attended that event as well. And we also did the Bloomberg Green event, which was also at the Four Seasons Hotel. There were lots of really interesting speakers that came, and John Kerry, I believe, was one of the ones, and I was there when he was speaking and learned a lot about the different initiatives he cares about. And so, Monday to Friday, that was kind of mostly doing talks. In between, I also attended Goals House, which was also hosted at the Four Seasons Hotel. And for those of you who haven't heard about Goals House, it is essentially like a summit that happens during UNGA, UN General Assembly, during Davos, South by Southwest. And it's a side event where they gather people for interesting panels and for roundtables. And really, prior to Goals House, I had never been part of a roundtable in my professional life. And this first time I did it was South by Southwest this year, where Goals House had an event. And you essentially have, 30 people together. You have a moderator at a table, and they have different questions. And you kind of, if you feel strongly about a certain question, you can chime in. But these are really interesting roundtables. There was representation from Estee Lauder, AB InBev, people from the UK government. And it was really cool to sit at the table with these individuals that I would normally really not come into contact with, and hearing their ideas on sustainability, entrepreneurs, startups, Scope 3. Very, very productive time, I feel. I think I did 3 of these roundtables, and you can see here, Susan is one of our Women in Climate members. Her organization, the one that she represents, SOS Feed, hosted a roundtable. So you can see in the middle photo, Susan is sitting there beside Arlo, who does a lot of work on the goals and Goals House. And at Goals House, we also had a special time to host a Women in Climate dinner, which was sponsored by MasterCard. So we had around 40 people at the Four Seasons for a dinner, all women, and the dinner was completely sold out, so to speak. I mean, you don't actually buy a ticket or anything, but it was completely packed. And so Goals House actually did a nightcap, like a girls' nightcap after the dinner, so that more people could come and attend. But during the dinner, we had a really nice meal, and we had different women sort of talk about, women in leadership, women in climate. And you can see here Shweta, many of you know her from our celebration, and Tola as well. She just spoke at our holiday summit. And the First Lady of Nigeria was at my table as well, and I had a really nice conversation with her. So For me, this was one of the most impactful events, just gathering all these women together and hearing their stories and empowering and lifting each other. Definitely one of the highlights for me. So, as I mentioned, I didn't have a blue zone pass the first week, but the green zone is an area that is part of COP and is open to the public. And in Sharm, it was a really large space with like art structures outside. They had like little scooters that you could take to get from one place to another. They had several pavilions. Some were focused on universities, some were focused on private sectors, some were focused on governments, and you could essentially just kind of walk in and they would have programming or maybe someone who was standing at the booth ready to chat about what they do. But you can see there some photos of like the art installations there. And Julie Gonzalez she's a member of Women in Climate, and she was speaking with her company Climeworks at one of the pavilions there. So I was able to kind of view that. And then another sort of open space is called the Innovation Zone. And the Innovation Zone had daily programming available. It was kind of like a mini COP in some senses. I liked it there because there was like a couple of different stages that you could choose from. The talks were short and digestible for this climate action stage, and our Women in Climate friend, Michelle Lancaster from Microsoft, was speaking there as well. So Innovation Zone was a really popular place to go if you did not have a Blue Zone badge for the first week. I also did another event, Oceanic Global, which Emily was really involved in. And you can see we had a little roundtable session there, just a discussion on different aspects of ocean topics. And there was also programming for the full day. And it was a very unique experience. There were performances, there was a sound bath, there was lots of music, and there was just a wide range of talks there. So I also really enjoyed that event. And then at the end of the first week, I don't know if you can tell, but it was really packed. And getting from place to place was, they had shuttle buses there that were free, but it was very unpredictable. Like a place that should only take 10 minutes by car could take you 50 minutes to get there by bus. And they had other means of transportation. There's like taxis and stuff like that. So you could take those. GM had a service where they brought in their electric cars and you could use an app to order one of those. And they were much cheaper than the taxis. But it was like, for the most part, it worked well. But sometimes it was like a little bit challenging. But the first week was absolutely packed. Really exhausting. You leave early in the morning, you come late at night. It was like very common to have dinner at like 9 o'clock. And for those who know me, I'm like definitely like a 6 o'clock dinner type of person. So it really shifted my lifestyle a lot. So when the weekend came around, it was nice to have a little bit of downtime where I met some new friends. So in this photo on the left here, we've got Karen, Sarah Beth, and Kristen. We're all from different areas. Sarah Beth actually lives in New York. Karen lives in London. And Karen and I did a little scuba sort of snorkeling trip on the weekend. So it's a very, very popular thing to do in Sharm because they have beautiful corals and you don't have to dive very deep. You can snorkel and see a lot. So we did one day where we went out to sea on a Saturday and just like relaxed and did a little bit of sunbathing and whatnot. And that was a lot of fun. So we're now entering the second week, and thanks to a really kind friend, I was able to have access to the Blue Zone. And I wasn't expecting that when I first booked my trip. And when I found out that I had access, I was like, oh my God, super elated because I really wanted to see what the actual conference was like. Most people at COP are running around sort of wearing this badge here with the blue lanyard. I didn't have that for the first week. It's not a big deal or anything, but like that's how you know someone is actually like attending COP is from that badge. And I was able to see our friend Martina there, who spoke at our Women in Climate celebration during New York Climate Week. We can see Emily also was a speaker at COP as well. And when you walk into like the actual conference area, it's a number of buildings that there's like 3 really large buildings that have kind of like booths. If you think of a conference or a trade show, that's kind of what it's like. And then there are some like smaller locations that have like theater style seating for different talks. So these are some photos of the different country booths. So I went by Canada. I sat to watch a talk that was taking place in the Japan booth, and then there's Brazil. And that map there is an example of one of the layouts. But at each of the booths, whether it's, Canada or Japan or Brazil or the US, earthday.org had their own booth. Basically, they have programming the entire day. So every booth has like 5 or 6 talks that they're hosting every single day. So there's just a lot of content going on. And if you are not directly connected or know someone speaking at a certain event, it's like, where do I even go to spend my time? Because there's probably over like 50 countries there times 5 talks a day. And the space is so big, it's very hard to find people, to find certain things. And unless you have an agenda or an appointment, it's not like a conference or a trade show where people like greet you and want to talk to you and tell you about what they're doing. Everyone's like really busy putting on the programming and the shows and whatnot. So you have to be really focused. You have to know where people are speaking to organize your time wisely. So I was able to attend a couple of different talks. This was on carbon removal. This is an example of the programming for Gender Day. So at COP, every day has a different focus. So day 14 was Gender Day. I believe day 8 or 9 was decarbonization. Then there's agriculture and all these different sort of themes. So that's just a sample of the agenda for day 14 for one of the sort of like spaces. And in the US booth, Meta was present, and they had their little sort of metaverse goggles there, so you could see different experiences related to climate. And behind there's actually an art exhibition, and I'm sure Emily's going to talk a little bit more about that as well. Because of Emily, I also was invited to take part in a press conference with the Blue Planet Alliance. They are an organization that is focused on helping countries transition to renewable energy. So really appreciate the opportunity. I got to talk about our Wall of Hope for COP27. I know many of you on the call have taken part in the Wall of Hope, so thank you for doing that. I also got to talk about the WhatsApp group that I hosted. It was intended to help women kind of share best practices and keep safe, share tips. And we started with about 10 people in the WhatsApp group. And by the end of COP, we had 160 people that had joined. And that's how I met a lot of new people as well, randomly, is through the WhatsApp group there. And in the press conference, this is actually recorded. At some point, I will put it on our website. But basically, I got a chance to really talk about women in climate. And then after that, I think I left on the Wednesday. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I went to the Blue Zone. And then afterwards, I did spend one day in Cairo. I was in Egypt for almost 2 weeks, and I only had one day to go to Cairo and see the pyramids. But those are all photos that I took. I went to see the actual pyramids, went inside a tomb, also went to the old market, and had a really fun time. So that was my experience. I would say, things that I would do differently next year is now that I know that like so much programming is going on, there are a few booths where I really enjoyed their programming. And so, getting in touch with them earlier, finding out what's going on, I think would be really helpful. Starting the WhatsApp group maybe a little bit earlier, and maybe doing a little bit of networking, pre-networking before we all head over, could be a nice sort of like global activation. I think next year it's going to be in Dubai, so it's going to be a very different experience than Egypt as well. So a few different things there. I definitely want to see more women on panels. There was a term that was brought up really often called manels. It's pretty self-explanatory, and it'd be nice to have more women present, more diverse perspectives. So I am going to be working on some projects to make that happen. So if you have any questions, if we have time at the end, I'm happy to save some time to answer them. But with that, hopefully gave you a good example of kind of what it was like, especially as a first timer. And I'm going to pass it now to Emilie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Michelle. That was a great overview, I think. And, I just want to start off with the same story as Michelle, as our flight being a little bit delayed, but really making the most out of it from our beginning of the week with networking. And we also met quite a few university students that were really interesting, either flying in through New York or those who are based in New York City who are going to learn with different experts at COP27. So I think it was a really good learning and exchange experience, even before we left New York City. So I'm based here in New York in the United Nations Plaza, where we have the Peace Boat US office. And I work as the United Nations liaison here in New York. So a lot of my work focuses on partnership, especially around oceans and climate action and the SDG action campaign. So really helping to create movement around education for the Sustainable Development Goals. As I mentioned earlier today, this was my third COP. So I've also learned quite a lot, as Michelle said, from her first experience, what she would do better next time. I also learned at COP25, had a very interesting experience because COP25 was supposed to actually be originally in Brazil. Brazil had a change of president and it got passed over to Chile. Chile then had a social uprising and it got passed to Spain to be in Madrid. So my first COP ended up being quite challenging because I was planning a lot for South America where I have strong ties, and things got moved over to Europe. And so I didn't think, anything could be more difficult than that, than an entire conference changing countries and having to start all over. But yet COP26 took place almost 2 years later in Glasgow last year after the pandemic, and still COVID regulations were pretty difficult. There was a lot of uncertainty about programming. And with even that complication, COP27 was almost even more of a challenge. So I really want to congratulate everyone who made it through this year's COP with new partnerships, with energy to continue working towards climate action. There were a lot of challenges, and I would say this was my most challenging out of the 3 COPs that I've been to so far. So this is just a first photo of the entrance of the venue. Like Michelle mentioned, there's the blue zone and also the green zone. This was the archway over the blue zone as you entered. Michelle also mentioned that we had our Blue Zone passes. Through Peace Boat, we were able to provide a pass for women in climate, but we also had 4 people in our delegation this year. So I was kind of helping from the Peace Boat US, New York-based side. We have here on the left, Natalia Lawan, who is from Seychelles. And we often support youth from small island developing states or large ocean states who are working towards ocean and climate action, as they're really the ones on the forefront of the climate crisis. And so Natalia was our co-sponsored youth, sponsored by Peace Boat US and also Blue Planet Alliance, who Michelle just mentioned for the press conference, who work towards renewable energy, especially for island nations. So together we worked to make sure that Natalia could join us. And Natalia also joined us at COP26. So she was quite experienced already with 1 COP and came in quite strong also as a young women leader to help us to get more Blue Zone badges through the Seychelles government. So this was a really unique collaboration that we had, with Peace Boat sponsoring her to attend. And then in turn, Natalia was helping us to also sponsor Blue Zone badges for partners, especially young people working on oceans, through the Seychelles government. On the right-hand side, you'll see myself and also the founder of Peace Boat, Yoshioka Tatsuya, who is now leading the organization since 1983 and working so diligently on climate action and especially achieving the SDGs. And on the right is my colleague Emilie McGlone, who's from France and lives in Tokyo and is working on our EcoShip project, which is one of the main reasons why we're also going to COP and working towards climate action and decarbonization of the maritime industry by building an eco-friendly cruise ship, which will be running on solar and wind, which is the EcoShip. So this was our delegation for COP27. And during our time at COP, we had quite a number of events that we hosted all throughout Egypt in Sharm el Sheikh, from the museum, having events in the city, to the green zone, the blue zone, hotels, meeting rooms, and press conferences. I think in total we did about 16 events as Peace Boat, so it was pretty active. We are very focused on partnerships for the SDGs, which is why we love what Women in Climate is doing to bring together so many different sectors, from government, private sector, United Nations, and NGOs. So we did this by hosting joint events and by highlighting each other's partnerships. And this is just one example, which was held at the SDG Pavilion. So Michelle mentioned all of the countries that have different pavilions, from Japan to Brazil and others. And then we also have these kind of independent middle pavilions, which are run by partners who are organizing different activities around the topics that are related to COP. So one of those is run by the United Nations DESA, Department of Economic and Social Development program, and they have been working with us to host these SDG Pavilion events. So they open up a pavilion all about the SDG related topics, from education to different targets, and pointing live to their live stream on SDGs programming on their TV. So we held an event there. But I think this is a really great opportunity for future partners who are attending COP to always keep an eye out to see if there's an SDG pavilion where you could fit in around any of those topics. We can go next. Yeah, this was the press conference that Michelle mentioned as well, but I just wanted to highlight that it was an incredible opportunity to host so many different partners in our delegation, but also to highlight their work. So I invited Michelle, as well as the other members here on the panel, to speak about their work, because these press conferences are recorded and kept on the UNFCCC website, and it's a great space to make announcements, to really put something in the press that you think is important, that's happening in your NGO, in your work, and to make sure that others know about it. So here we have Brandon Levy on the left from Sustainable Ocean Alliance, one of our partners, and came on board as a guest speaker on the Peace Boat as well, announcing about the Our Ocean Conference coming up in March in Panama. For those of you who are interested in joining, it's going to be March 2nd to the 4th. That week will be very much highlighted by organizations working on ocean and climate action. And Brandon also highlighted our Ocean and Climate Youth Ambassador program, since he was on board with Natalia, who was our guest youth delegate. Next, please. Yeah, and this was the inaugural pavilion for the oceans this year at COP27. It was incredible to see actually the movement. In COP26, we had a lot of progress, I'd say, on getting the ocean onto the COP agenda. But this was the very first time there was ever in COP history an ocean pavilion. So this was a great space for ocean leaders to come together. And it was incredible also to see the networking happening. They had kind of a space where you could watch videos and sit at tables and have meetings. You could even book the meeting room space. And then they had like an amphitheater with an ocean blue seating space where you could have discussions. And they were booked all throughout the conference. We held 2 side events at this pavilion, one on the very first day and one towards the middle. So it was exciting to, just see this pavilion. And I hope that it continues next year. I'm pretty sure that it will. It had great feedback from everyone and was a really good networking space for those working on, especially SDG 14 for life below water. And as Peace Boat, we also, of course, are focused on all of the SDGs, but sailing on the open ocean has a big focus for us to promote ocean conservation and climate action. So main topics that we talked about during COP were especially youth empowerment from small island developing states, making sure that island nations have their voices be heard at the table. And on board our ship, we have capacity building programs where we bring young people to talk about solutions and challenges, especially around SIDS. And we put them together on the ship with experts and mentors who can also help to lead them in some of the conversations, but listen to them as well. So we had Cristiana Figueres, who was very instrumental in the Paris Agreement, and she's kind of in the middle there doing a roundtable. And we had young people speaking at the United Nations previously before joining COP. So all of this is kind of in preparation for what is, having a seat at the table, making sure young people are not only empowered to attend these conferences, but joining them and being alongside them during the process is something I really enjoy. So I'm kind of a mentor to some Ocean and Climate Youth Ambassador. Then we have Yoshioka Tatsuya, who's from Peace Boat. And here they're actually announcing our next youth program, which will be together with Wanjira Matai, who's on the right-hand side, working towards the African youth programs on board. So this was also, as Michelle mentioned, the African COP, because it took place in Egypt. So we wanted to highlight that and start to promote the next steps of having more African youth on board the Peace Boat and really seeing what they can do to work together and find solutions for climate action across the African continent. Next, please. Oh, and yes, and this is just an example of Natalia's great work that she did during COP. We were really proud of her getting her voice out there in so many places. And so it was picked up by the BBC News, which was excellent coverage for her to share her work. And also, the plight of island nations and looking at sea level rise, climate change and temperature increase, but then also finding hope and looking at how young people can really make a difference. And then our final kind of storytelling piece of COP27 was the eco ship. And this is an example really of what the ship will look like, sailing with wind and solar power to reduce our CO2 by more than 40%. And this will be Peace Boat's eco ship of the future. Currently, we are working towards the final stages of all the design and implementation of the programming and what that will look like, how to use the ship as a vessel for green exhibitions and hosting programming on board, in particular, working towards the United Nations Ocean Decade. This is a decade of science for sustainable development. So we're really intrigued to bring more scientists on board, more climate advocates, more young people, and just have all the stakeholders really traveling together and working on all these issues on the ocean. So we're hoping that these steps also that we made at COP27 will help carry on to COP28. We've been working with many different networking groups. So I think that within COP27, we had, as Michelle mentioned, they created the WhatsApp group, which grew in numbers by over 100 plus partners. We also had a working group that then had more than 200 plus partners just by the end of COP. And so these kind of groups and connections that we made, we hope that we can help to navigate the COP experience and have more people join us. So if you are thinking about going to COP in the future, please reach out to Michelle or I, and we'll help you to guide you through that process for next year. So thanks so much for everyone's attention.
Thank you so much for that, Emilie. Very, very interesting insights. And thank you for taking the time to put all the photos and everything together. Much appreciated.
My pleasure.
All right. So now I'm going to add Fran to the slides here. And the stage is yours, Fran.
Thanks so much. And thanks everybody for joining. So I had a bit of a different viewpoint of the COP in where I sat. I had what is a pink badge, which is a party badge on a government delegation, as I was an advisor to the government of Antigua and Barbuda in their capacity as chair of the Alliance of Small Island States. I'm going to go through a bit of kind of my experience at this COP specifically, similar to others. It probably was my most challenging COP I've ever attended in my professional career. And I'm going to run through a bit about prep days, the Leaders Summit, the kind of negotiations, and how the COP ended up kind of closing out. We started off with two, on the next slide you see two, basically how we as the Alliance of Small Island States kind of prepare. So the week before the COP, we have what's called preparatory days. So you have 2 days for least developed countries to kind of coordinate internally, 2 days for the Alliance of Small Island States to coordinate internally, 2 days for the Group of 77, which is all developing countries, to coordinate, and then you have the opening of the COP. I would say that the COP has evolved a significant amount since kind of, the 2000s, when, we are now in an implementation phase of the Paris Agreement. And previously, COPs and other UNFCCC meetings were very much solely about the negotiations. And now it is very much kind of like almost at two levels. You have the negotiations happening here. And then on top of that, you have what Michelle describes in the pavilions, in country zones, in UN agencies, pavilions and events. And then you have the green space. And at this COP, you had the innovation space. I can't remember exactly what it's called. I have to say I never even stepped foot in the green zone or the innovation space, just because you end up sitting quite heavy in the negotiations. So, and we're now in a space where hopefully everybody sees themselves in the Paris Agreement, and everybody globally, and especially private sector, civil society, everybody should be embedding climate in one part or another of their work. So the COP in and of itself is kind of the culmination of a full year of negotiations and discussions. It is comprised of a series of decisions that are taken at the country government level, and some are mandated from previous meetings. So some are required to be taken at that year, and then others come forward due to the leadership of one country or another, or the host country, as it was in COP. So over the year, we had what's called the Petersburg Climate Dialogue in Germany. We had prep meetings for 2 weeks in June in Germany. We had a series of technical meetings at the negotiator level throughout the year. We had ministerial meetings. You had a pre-COP in Kinshasa in October, early November. And so there was, COP kind of represents a culmination of progress across the year, and of course of years of negotiation and discussion on a lot of these things. In addition to some of those mandated things, there are other outcomes that different countries push that I was speaking to. For example, Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, Bridgetown Initiative, which speaks about access to finance and issues around restructuring multilateral development banks, et cetera. So there are things that can come forward into the climate agenda if there is momentum and partnership building throughout the year. I would say this year specifically was quite difficult in the geopolitical space towards an agreement at the COP. It was very different to the dynamic that was faced in Glasgow last year. This year, obviously, we saw the illegal invasion of Ukraine, which then subsequently sparked an energy crisis across Europe, with many countries kind of short-term looking to how they compensate for the gas to remove themselves from Russian gas, and so dipping a little bit into coal. So basically, the energy landscape was not ideal to be taking decisions at this COP past what was already agreed to last year. We tried very hard, don't get me wrong. And globally, we had not seen a significant amount of progress in moving towards halving emissions by 2030, which is what is required to keep 1.5 degree goal within reach. And on top of that, I guess I would say that we had a challenge with the host country, or what's called the presidency, in that they lacked a little bit of, they lacked the articulation of their vision for the COP. And usually a lot of it is very much led by a strong presidency pushing forward on the issues. So these are a few pictures of our prep days for the Alliance of Small Island States, coupled with us and the team. As you would have seen in a lot of the media, financing to address loss and damage was a critical issue at this COP for small island states, especially, and for least developed countries. We had put forward a proposal back in June to include this on the agenda for negotiations under the issue of finance. We had a negotiation before the COP even started, before you guys probably stepped foot in Egypt. We had negotiations through the night, Friday night and Saturday night, to agree on how we would reflect on this in the agenda. We ended up having agreement of it on the agenda, which it was a hard-fought battle. The US wanted to include language that articulates that the discussions and the outcomes of these discussions around, like, a fund or a financing response fund to address loss and damage should not result in compensation or liability, which is a very clear red line for them. Anyways, it ended up on the agenda, which we were very happy with, and we moved forward into the negotiations. So the next slide, we moved into the Leaders Summit. So I was responsible for supporting my prime minister in this space, and here you can see him speaking to the previous COP president, Alok Sharma. Bottom right is a picture of our Alliance of Small Island States leaders meeting. And his responsibility there was basically come, make a statement, and then meet with a variety of different leaders, advance the position of the group, and like basically set the tone for the rest of the negotiations. This was a really critical piece, especially into elevating the issue of financing to address loss and damage. We got it on the agenda, and then we needed a commitment to make sure that there was actually a substantive outcome at this COP. We weren't just satisfied with ticking the box and having it on the agenda without any real discussion on what that would look like and what this COP could really deliver on. So then I'm going to speak a little bit about the negotiations, which is in the next slide. And that's where I sat mainly in focusing on mitigation and science issues. My main piece was what's called the Mitigation Work Program. And in here, you can see a variety of different spaces in which we engaged, whether it be, in some of these, you can see the decision text is up on the screen. And this is a bunch of negotiators from everybody from the US to Brazil to Finland to the UK, Saudi Arabia, China, etc. Basically, word by word, kind of editing, doing these textual changes to documents so that we could come to an agreement by the end. This issue is one of the issues that was kicked up to a very political level. There were a lot of concerns around how this was being advanced, and hopefully not undermining the bottom-up and country-driven nature of the Paris Agreement and what we have their nationally determined contributions. And so there was a significant amount of discussions in which I ended up sitting at the table with a series of ministers, arguing with each other about how we advance on this issue for about 4 hours. So it was a very interesting dynamic. And in that space, while I was there initially, and I spoke on the floor initially, a minister from the Maldives came, and I would be supporting through her, because obviously at the ministerial level, you would prefer to have ministers talking to ministers rather than advisors or more technical people. This then we progress into the final stage, which is basically the closing of the COP and the ministerial segment, where my minister from Antigua and Barbuda here, you can see him speaking with John Kerry, and then also the minister from Chile, and the cameras are there. Basically, Netflix is, a group being funded by Netflix are doing a documentary specifically about the COP and following a few negotiators, including my minister. And up there on the right is us waiting for the final text to be uploaded on the website and us to be ready to close out the COP. Once all decisions are agreed and the text itself is agreed, the UN takes anywhere between 3 and 6 hours to process documents and get them ready for us to then take those decisions formally in the plenary. And so it's a really long waiting game, and you would have seen a lot of people sleeping on sofas. We definitely did not sleep on the last Saturday night. The COP went into overtime, a significant amount. And I actually had to leave on my flight before the COP finished. So I left colleagues in the plenary as the plenary was closing. I think just looking out to next year and the COP, the UAE as the next COP president will be announcing their kind of priority areas in January, I think, during their Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, which they have every year. And they anticipate to drive quite a bit more and try to drive initiatives, including kind of building partnerships for concrete projects and to showcase that there is an energy transition happening. And they are supporting, building out those what are being called kind of just energy plans, et cetera. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions and add detail if you want it. There's a lot that I didn't say, a lot that happens outside of the space that I sit in, that Emilie spoke to. COPs now have become such a large space, and I hope have become more inclusive, because, not just governments taking decisions in a political space can shift the needle to the extent that's required.
Wonderful. That was amazing, Fran, to get a sneak peek behind the scenes. And I'm excited. When is the Netflix documentary going to come out?
I actually have no idea. I kind of ran away from it at the COP. I should ask. I'll ask. It's probably, I did ask them, and they said they weren't sure if they were going to be following any negotiations next year, and if they were going to kind of wrap it up at this COP with somewhat of a success of the adoption of the agenda item on loss and damage finance. But there is a lot of work to do this coming year.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you for that sneak peek. And we have 3 questions so far, so we have 10 minutes. So let's see if we can get through some of them. Imogen asks, what were each of your biggest takeaways from the COP? And maybe we can start from the back. So Emilie, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Yeah. Biggest takeaways. There was a lot this year. I think I learned so much, and everyone did too. I think after the pandemic and seeing the impact of the work that we need to do now to achieve the SDGs, we're quite behind, and everybody knows that. And I just want to congratulate Fran too. I know that the negotiating rooms were extremely difficult at times and long hours, and it's everybody coming together. A lot of people think, what's your your takeaway from COP? Oh, why didn't the UN just decide and adopt this new agreement? It's not just the UN making decisions. It's more than 192 countries coming together, lots of negotiation, lots of conversation taking place to reach those agreements, right? So my biggest takeaway from kind of all of that, I think, is, encouraging civil society to participate more. This year, the Youth Negotiators Program, and I'd love to hear later from Fran about this too, my own question to her, but the Youth Negotiators Program was a big improvement this year. I felt that young people were really motivated to help move the needle with the negotiations taking place. And that's been kind of a different aspect. I think the previous years, we didn't see as many young people sitting at the table. So my takeaway this year would be just to continue supporting youth education at COP and really having young people also participate in an effective way.
Wonderful. Thank you, Emilie. Fran, what about you? Your biggest key takeaways this year?
My biggest takeaway across the whole year, and not just necessarily kind of the outcome of the COP, would be similar to Emilie, actually, the role of non-state actors. I think that we as parties, the negotiators, the country, the government representatives, especially on key issues that have garnered so much support outside of negotiations, the role that non-state actors play in putting pressure on their own governments, that you could see that happening across Europe and the US. Honestly, if in the closing of Glasgow, we were extremely disappointed, to the point where, I definitely cried several times about the outcome around loss and damage. These are 3 very draining weeks and emotionally tumultuous. And the outcome was very disappointing on loss and damage. And there was a significant kind of outcry from civil society on this issue specifically. And we took a step back and basically garnered that support and garnered that pressure, and realized, basically put it in their hands and drove that conversation. And I don't think that we would have been able to have the outcome that we got at this COP without that pressure. And I have to say, that is, yes, we did a lot of the legwork, and yes, we did, a lot of but I don't think it would be able to be done just by, small island states speaking up in the negotiations. So yeah, I think that collective momentum is really the driving factor.
Wonderful, Fran. So for me, I think the biggest key takeaway and reflection that I have is that, I think COP is very important. I think there are people out there who think, oh, you just have all these people flying into the city and having fun and like, what are they actually doing? But especially for the small nation states, the small island states, the African states, if we don't have these conversations and if they're not in person, it's very easy to have no accountability. And, having everyone in the same place, being able to have these conversations and these negotiations are so important. Like, not necessarily having someone like me attend, but having the party negotiators attend is so important. And I already hear rhetoric around, oh, next year it's at Dubai, I'm going to boycott or, boycott COP in general because it's blah, blah, blah. But I think it would be very unfair to some of those states and countries who don't have a voice typically to speak up. This is a very important place to raise awareness around that type of justice. So I would say, it's an important global event. I have a question around, let's see, how do you get a blue zone pass? I guess I'll answer that really, really quickly. So basically, you have to either be an observer party. So you could be a nonprofit that has observer status. You have to officially kind of register with the UN. You have to be around for more than 2 years, and the application process is quite long. You could get a badge from a representing party, so a country that is going, you can be part of their delegation. And, there are day passes available, there are week passes available, and they are definitely a hot commodity. Getting your hands on a badge if you don't have one is like, lots of people go and they don't have badges and they hope to kind of like get one somehow. So yeah, they're hard to come by. But Emily and Fran, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, for our organization, we have the observer status that Michelle mentioned. So we have the opportunity to receive badges every year directly to our organization's account. They use a special website also on the inside. There's a lot of logistics on how the badges are distributed. But basically, if you are an organization that has observer status, through this specific website of the UNFCCC, you can access the account and you can assign badges with passport copies of each person who's attending COP. Then they receive an official invitation letter. They have to confirm that letter and bring the letter together with their passport to the office of the conference to receive their Blue Zone badge. And as I mentioned, this year we received 8, and we were able to split those up in week 1 and week 2. And then within those weeks, you can also give the day badges that Michelle mentioned, which is actually you have to give someone who has a badge in your delegation that day badge to someone else. So that person couldn't attend the conference if it was, let's say, November 12th. That day was given to someone else. So those badges are all within their allocation for each organization, and they are limited. So as Michelle said, if you know an organization that has observer status to COP and you're interested in going to COP28,